Guns in the Division series have always been a bit boring to me. They lack almost all of the RPG elements of the armor pieces and have never really complemented brand or set bonuses. Mostly static weapons are fine when you're playing some generic Battle Royale or Call of Duty clone. But in this game, I can't help but feel many of the problems we have with the meta and weapon balancing is due to an overly simple system. I don't want the weapons to be so simple and basic. I would find it much more fun if weapons actually conveyed an identity to the user. Range, reload, accuracy, stability, those are nice things to have, but they come in an extremely distant afterthought to actual weapon damage or RPM and ammo capacity. This gives many weapons an actual bland feel in the game. It also means the vast majority of weapon choices are ignored because there is little else to base your builds on. It almost feels like weapons are part of a completely separate game from the one that I'm actually playing. Like they are an afterthought or last-minute addition with no intentions to make them actually feel complementary to a build. For weapons to feel unique, or at least for specific weapon classes to feel more varied over another, and not just having SMGs act as shorter range assault rifles or LMGs act as shakier assault rifles, something needs to be added to the system, I think. If you look at many other games, for the most part, the weapon you use is actually determined by your personal preference. But also it depends on the build and the role that you're using. Not every weapon will suit every need, which is why you rarely see one weapon being used in those games by everyone. Yet in the Division 2, there is almost always a single meta weapon. It was pretty much the same in Division 1. You had the House. Currently, you have the Eagle Bearer in Division 2. Before I get into my specific suggestions, I just want to thank you guys for watching and remind you to let me know what you think or what you would like to see done with guns to make them more fun in the comments below. My first suggestion is for the devs to finally include some brand or gear set bonuses to weapons. They almost had something in Division 1, and if you guys remember the blind gear that they were supposed to add and how it was supposed to pair up with the Urban MDR, and that was, I guess, supposed to be some sort of reward for getting level 40 in the underground. The thing that they backtracked on and kind of pissed a bunch of people off, including me. If you look at the weapons in this game, they almost feel completely disconnected from the actual armor. The classes of weapons just feel like a wasted chance. You could have such unique build design if they actually incorporated weapons to fit so much better with armor just beyond the simple talents that they use now. It really feels like a mistake that they haven't done this. They don't need to add this to all existing weapons. It makes sense to have high ends that don't quite match with things that are just a straight weapon and don't do anything. But at the same time, they could do so much more if they just had special rewards or something like that that would actually be considered better than high ends or better than named weapons. But since they would require you to actually wear 3 pieces of that brand armor to get the 4th piece from the weapon, they could be seen as slightly restrictive. So having a little bit stronger weapon stats might be actually worth that. Who knows? I just think that making weapons actually feel like a build piece rather than just this weapon is what I use would actually be a good step to make the game better. Moving on to the next idea I'm talking about here is a replacement for the flat damage roll on current guns, and just basically replacing it with an actual variable range roll. And this isn't a new concept. Many games have done this, some still actually do. Some of the best examples are games like the original Fallouts, Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, if you guys are familiar with that. The Witcher series actually does this. Of course, all the Diablo games do this. And then, of course, probably one of the biggest games, World of Warcraft does this. In these games, you would actually find very similar weapon classes to each other. And that's, kind of like the two-handed weapons that are slow but have a huge range and damage, allowing for, massive spikes in DPS. But something like a dagger, which is, very fast, but it has like a very small damage range. And that basically allows you to do a very constant DPS. I feel like this could actually help many weapon classes feel interesting again and make Division 2 more unique in terms of build diversity and stat investment. Not to mention give it more classic RPG looter flavor. For example, if you look at ARs and compare them to LMGs or SMGs, the difference is pretty much amount to reticle pattern alone. The current design forces most weapons into a very similar DPS pattern. In the end, most versions have a similar model in another class, just kind of like how the AK or the T821 or the M60 are high damage, slow firing, and the only real distinction between them is basically just the effective range and that minor weapon class bonus. Nothing really enhances that distinction, and for most purposes, all you have to do is really just swap your glove roll 12% AR damage over 12% LMG damage. You know, there's not too much difference there. By giving them more elements to play with, I think you can actually greatly enhance the feeling of a build without reworking every aspect of a weapon class. The way that I actually envision it would allow LMGs to hit similar to the two-handed weapons in many RPG-style games. You know, the slow-hitting, huge damage range kind of weapons. SMGs would function like daggers and having a very narrow damage range. This type of design would make weapon types feel a little more unique. It would add to that feeling of the LMG guy being that huge hulking tank-like character. You just get smashed over the head with a giant hammer. You know, you're going to feel it. You know, the SMG pistol user being that kind of like shifty figure in the shadows who is, you know, equipped to do steady and reliable damage. You know, like add these kind of distinctions a little, you know, not directly. You don't want to make it feel like, oh, I'm picking SMG, so I'm a rogue now. You want to be able to actually build to that kind of, you know, make it feel like that if that's what you're into. If you are interested in playing this game as an RPG, which I am, and I think many others are, you kind of would like some of these basic ideas to be incorporated much more into the current game. That brings me into my third topic, and it's pretty much something that has bugged me since the first game. And that's basically just the lack of playstyle modifiers given to actual weapons. When I think of an LMG, for example, I usually picture it being fired from a window or on sandbags or on a bipod. I don't usually picture guys going full on Rambo as the source of inspiration for how an LMG should be used. To me, it would make sense that LMGs have a very specific while in cover bonus. This could be applied in some form or another to, you know, almost every weapon type. I mean, it doesn't just have to be in cover. These things would not mandate a playstyle, and they would not punish players. They would just actually provide a small incentive to play with your weapon more like an actual class, rather than just a dispenser of bullets. You know, for example, let's just say you take pistols. They could gain a 30% damage when shooting an enemy in the back, you know, kind of like an assassin type role. Or you could have, you know, shotguns disorient enemies within 3 meters for, you know, a couple seconds. And that would kind of make shotguns usable for protecting you from rushers. SMGs could give a 15% boost to movement speed if paired with another SMG. So basically, you know, if you're rocking double SMGs, you can move a little bit faster. So kind of something similar to, you know, being unencumbered in a lot of the other action-adventure RPGs like, you know, something like Dark Souls. ARs could get a 15% damage boost for the first bullets out of a trigger squeeze. So basically, you know, that would just encourage burst fire damage, so that, you know, people aren't just using ARs and just holding down the trigger until the magazine's empty. Rifles could gain increased crit chance, you know, the further away a target is. You know, like in the old school westerns when the bad guy is trying to ride away and the sheriff hits him at, you know, the last possible second as he's riding away on the horse. LMGs could gain, you know, like a 20% reload speed and provide 20% damage reduction while in cover, you know, to encourage a more defensive playstyle. And then lastly, marksman rifles could possibly shoot through light cover and maybe even shields to, you know, deal a small portion of the damage, depending on the cover that they're hitting, of course. I think we've all had that same issue or that same thought where somebody's hiding behind the stupid little metal fencing and it's covered by a banner and you can't shoot them. So I think, you know, that would be a nice little bonus for that. My final idea is basically just to give weapons more identity, you need to treat them more like the gear in the rest of the game. To do that, I think you need to give them some additional form of stat roll. Rifles and SMGs could gain a utility roll because, you know, when you think of rifles and SMGs, you generally think of engineers or medics, right? When you think of, you know, shotguns and LMGs, you know, they could gain a defensive roll because when you think of shotguns and LMGs, you think of either the big hulking tank character or the guy who's, you know, charging through the door first. Again, you know, the defensive role would suit that. And then, of course, when you're looking at assault rifles or marksman rifles, you generally think of standard infantry soldier or, you know, the sniper. Obviously, in those roles, generally they tend to be the most offensive of the roles. So that would make sense where if you're trying to include ARs and marksman rifles to that type of style, you would give them an offensive role. Pistols, I think, would need a little bit more evaluation because they are not actively used by most builds, and just giving them something because you already have it equipped seems kind of like poor design as of now. So I'm actually going to make a separate video here shortly covering how I would change pistols specifically. So stay tuned for that. As of right now, these options just give more incentive to pick a weapon you might not normally use. because you actually get a bonus for that slot. It would not stop you from using something else. It would actually enhance, the archetype that you're actually trying to go for. You're actually trying to build that classic medic from, World War II or, something like that. You want this specific style, and, it kind of encourages that, right? No, these are just simple thoughts to show the possibilities of basically just what could be done. I mean, it's not my job to come up with every idea or make all the freaking design changes for this game. Sometimes I wish it was. But they're just ideas for how to improve weapon diversity. With the current changes coming in TU6, I actually fear that weapons will pretty much all be the same. All the weapons are getting their DPS brought into a very, very narrow band. And that's kind of, they want it designed that way to actually avoid meta weapons. I don't think it's going to work very well. But the negative side effect of what is actually going to happen with that is that all the weapons are going to feel very bland. I mean, why would you choose the clunky LMG when you can have a laser AR that just won't miss as much? All I'm saying is that I want weapons to feel like they actually have an identity and enhance the build that I'm trying to make. So far, most of them have just been things that have talents, and especially on my skill builds, I don't even care past the talents. Like, that's it. If you guys have stayed this far, I thank you for watching, and I definitely thank you for the support. Looking forward to hear your ideas and things that you want to share in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.